She learned to live in silence, but when a stranger started watching her, she realized her peace was threatened. What she didn't expect was that a stubborn stray would become her guardian. Now, as she tries to understand the danger around her, she discovers that her greatest ally has 4 paws. Welcome to the channel. Before you begin, like and subscribe so we can continue creating stories like this one. Sarah Fields had always appreciated the silence that had accompanied her since she was 5 years old. Born and raised in Oak Ridge, in the mountainous region of Northern Virginia, she had lost her hearing after a high fever in childhood. At 32, she worked as a freelance illustrator, creating digital art for small children's book publishers. Her home, an old construction in the historic district of the town, was her private refuge, a place where silence was not a limitation, but a choice. Autumn in Oak Ridge brought with it a gentle fog that covered the cobblestone streets. Sarah was walking back home after an afternoon at the town library, where she often worked when she needed inspiration. Her steps were careful on the irregular stones, while the mist began to thicken with the falling evening. It was during this walk that her eyes, trained to capture details that others missed, noticed a presence behind her. A medium-sized mixed-breed dog was following her a few yards away. It had disheveled brown fur, a droopy ear, and a cautious posture, as if assessing the situation. Sarah stopped, turned completely, and faced the animal. It also stopped, sitting on its hind legs, keeping its eyes fixed on her. "Go away," she gestured, waving her hands in the air. The dog tilted its head slightly but didn't move. Sarah rolled her eyes, adjusted her bag on her shoulder, and continued her walk, ignoring the canine presence that resumed its steps, always maintaining the same distance. Upon reaching home, Sarah quickly opened the ornate iron gate, entered and closed it, casting one last glance at the dog that now sat on the sidewalk, watching her with disconcerting intensity. For a moment she felt a pang of pity, but soon pushed that feeling away. Life had taught her to be practical and not to be carried away by fleeting emotions. Within the safety of her home, Sarah prepared tea and settled in front of her computer to finish some illustrations. Through the window, she noticed that the sky had completely darkened and the fog had thickened, making the night even more silent. She lost herself in her work, letting the hours pass as she gave life to fantastic creatures on her screen. It was only when she got up to stretch her legs that she noticed with a start that the dog was still outside. It was lying down, huddled, under the small cover of the gate, protecting itself from the fine drizzle that had begun to fall. Sarah frowned. Why had this animal chosen her house in particular? There were dozens of residences on that street, many of them with people who would certainly be more receptive to a stray dog. She moved away from the window, determined to ignore the unwanted visitor. She had no space in her organized life for, "Hey, pet." Animals needed constant care, created disorder, and mainly depended emotionally on their owners. Sarah had built an existence based precisely on the opposite: independence, order, and self-sufficiency. The next morning, when she opened the door to retrieve the newspaper that the delivery person left daily, she was surprised to find the dog still there, now sitting in an alert position as if on guard. Its brown eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her take a step back. "You're still here," she signed, unconsciously using sign language as she did when talking to herself. The dog moved its ears as if trying to understand. "I have nothing for you." Sarah closed the door, but the image of the animal persisted in her mind as she prepared breakfast. There was something in that look, an intelligence, a determination, that seemed almost human. Still, she was determined not to get involved. She had learned in the worst possible way that emotional connections only brought pain and disappointment. During the day, Sarah tried to concentrate on her work, but her thoughts kept returning to the dog. Why had it chosen to follow her? And why did it continue there, guarding a door that would never open for it? By the end of the afternoon, she surrendered to curiosity and peeked through the window. The animal remained at its post, patient, as if it had all the time in the world. Without realizing it, she began to observe it more frequently. She noticed how it moved away, only to seek water from a nearby puddle, quickly returning to its post. How it maintained a respectful distance, from everyone who passed by without begging for attention or food. How its eyes always seemed alert, attentive to every movement on the street. 3 days passed in this strange routine. Sarah would leave for her appointments, and the dog would follow her at a distance, returning later to stand guard in front of her house. She continued pretending it didn't exist, but she found herself looking through the window more and more often, checking if it was still there. It was on the 4th day that something changed. Leaving for a meeting with a client, Sarah noticed that the dog was not at its usual post. A strange sensation invaded her. Was it relief or concern? She pushed these thoughts away and continued on her path. However, upon turning the corner, she saw the reason for the absence. The dog was facing 2 men who were conversing on the other side of the street, occasionally looking in the direction of her house. Sarah slowed her pace, observing the scene. The dog remained tense, the fur on its back slightly bristled, its eyes fixed on the strangers. For a moment, one of the men made a move to cross the street, but the dog immediately positioned itself, emitting what she imagined to be a growl. The man hesitated, and after exchanging a few words with his companion, both moved away. Something in the expression of those men left Sarah uneasy. They didn't seem like local residents or common tourists who frequented the historic town. There was something predatory in their movements, a tension that she could capture even at a distance. The dog waited until they were completely out of sight, and only then returned to its post in front of Sarah's house. That night, lying in her bed, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the incident. It was as if the dog was protecting her house. Protecting her. The idea seemed absurd, but she couldn't find another explanation. In the darkness of her room, her thoughts were interrupted by a vibration on her cell phone. It was a message from her neighbor, Mrs. Margaret, an elderly lady who lived 2 houses down, and who was one of the few people with whom Sarah maintained regular contact. Sarah opened Mrs. Margaret's message with a slight frown. The elderly lady rarely sent messages at night. "Sarah dear, I saw 2 strange men observing your house today. One of them asked if I knew the deaf woman who lived alone. I didn't like the look of them. Stay alert." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. So it wasn't just an impression of hers. Those men were really interested in her house, in her. But why? She had no enemies, lived discreetly, with almost no contact with other people besides her clients and some neighbors. She got up from the bed and checked all the locks. Her house was old, with wooden doors and windows that, although charming, didn't offer the best security. She had never worried about this before. Oakridge was a relatively peaceful town, especially her residential neighborhood. She replied to the message, thanking Mrs. Margaret for the warning and promising to be careful. When she returned to the window, she saw that the dog was still there, motionless under the persistent drizzle. Alert eyes turned toward the street. For the first time, Sarah felt a wave of gratitude for that silent presence. The next morning, she made an impulsive decision. Before leaving for her appointment, she left a plate with water and some pieces of chicken in the corner of the garden, far from the main door. She didn't want to encourage the animal to stay, but she also couldn't ignore that it was somehow standing guard on her property. "This doesn't mean I'm adopting you," she signed to the dog, which observed her movements attentively. "It's just a thank you." The animal didn't move toward the food while she was present, maintaining its vigilant posture. Sarah nodded, almost with approval, and went on her way. Upon returning hours later, the plate was empty, and the dog had returned to its habitual post. Thus began a silent routine between the two. Sarah left food and water every day, but maintained a respectful distance. The dog, in turn, never tried to enter the house or demanded more attention than she was willing to give. It was a tacit agreement that worked for both. A week passed in this peculiar arrangement. Sarah began to notice that she felt safer when leaving the house, knowing that the animal would be there when she returned. Without realizing it, she started mentally calling it Guardian, although she had never verbalized or signed that name to it. It was on a rainy Friday that things began to change. Sarah was returning from a meeting with an editor when she spotted, across the street, one of the men that the dog had kept away days ago. He was standing under a black umbrella looking directly at her with an indecipherable expression. Instinctively, Sarah quickened her pace, feeling her heart beat faster. As she turned the corner of her street, she almost collided with someone walking in the opposite direction. She raised her eyes, and her body froze. There, standing in front of her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, was Richard Mendez. Richard had been her boyfriend for almost 2 years, a relationship that had ended bitterly 6 months ago. He had never accepted the end of the relationship, but after a few weeks of insistent messages and unexpected appearances, he had finally seemed to give up. Seeing him there, so close to her house, made all of Sarah's internal alarms go off. "Sarah, what a coincidence," he said, clearly articulating the words so that she could read his lips. "I was in town for work and thought I'd stop by to see how you're doing." She took a step back, uncomfortable with the proximity. Her hands trembled slightly as she responded, both in sign language and vocally. "It wasn't a coincidence, Richard. You know where I live." His smile faltered for an instant. "Always suspicious," he shook his head. "I just wanted to talk. I miss you." Before Sarah could respond, a movement caught her peripheral attention. The guardian had appeared by her side, silent as always. The animal wasn't growling or showing its teeth, but its posture was clearly protective, positioning itself between her and Richard. Richard's expression changed instantly. His eyes, previously falsely warm, hardened. "Since when do you have a dog?" he asked, his tone now colder. "He found me," Sarah replied, feeling a strange confidence with the guardian by her side, "and now I need to go." She tried to pass by Richard, but he took a sidestep, blocking her path. "We need to talk, Sarah. About us, about the future." The guardian emitted a deep sound, the first sound Sarah had seen it make. Although she couldn't hear it, she felt the vibration of the growl through the slight tremor of the ground beneath her feet. Richard instinctively backed off, his gaze alternating between her and the dog. "Another day, perhaps," he muttered before moving away, casting one last irritated glance in the direction of the animal. Sarah released the air she hadn't realized she was holding. She looked at the guardian, which now stared at her with those intelligent eyes, as if asking if she was okay. On impulse, she extended her hand and briefly touched the animal's head. The fur was damp from the drizzle, but surprisingly soft under her fingers. "Thank you," she signed, and for the first time smiled at her silent protector. That night, Sarah allowed the guardian to sleep on the covered porch, protected from the rain that was now falling heavily. She prepared a small improvised bed with old blankets and placed fresh food in its plate. The encounter with Richard had left her deeply disturbed. There had been something in his eyes, a cold determination that didn't match his apparently friendly words. While preparing a tea to calm her nerves, her cell phone vibrated again. It was a message from an unknown number. With a bad feeling, Sarah opened it and felt the blood freeze in her veins. "You'll regret having treated me like that. That mutt won't always be around to protect you." Her hands trembled as she blocked the number. How had Richard gotten her new number? She had changed it precisely to avoid his messages after the breakup. And how did he know about the guardian, which had only appeared in her life a few days ago? With growing anxiety, Sarah checked all the locks again and left some lights on before going to bed. Lying in the dark, she couldn't stop thinking about the encounter, the threatening message, the strange men who were observing her house. There was a connection between all these events, she could feel it, and at the center of everything was Richard. Sleep was slow to come, and when she finally dozed off, it was an agitated sleep, filled with nightmares where she ran through dark corridors pursued by faceless shadows. In her dreams she called for help, but no sound came from her throat. And then, just when the shadows were about to reach her, a brown figure emerged between her and her pursuers, the guardian, silent and resolute, keeping the invisible threats at bay. Sarah woke up startled by the vibration of her tactile alarm under the pillow. Outside, the rain had ceased, but the sky remained grey, heavy with low clouds. She got up feeling exhausted, as if she hadn't rested at all. Upon opening the curtain, she saw the guardian already awake, sitting in an alert position on the porch. There was something different in its behavior that morning. The animal seemed tenser, its eyes constantly checking the street, its ears moving at the slightest movement. Sarah followed its gaze and felt her heart skip a beat. Parked across the street was a black car that she had never seen before. Inside, yet partially visible, was one of the men that the Guardian had kept away days ago. Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach as she observed the black car. It wasn't a coincidence. First Richard, now those strange men. She was being watched and the sensation was suffocating. She quickly pulled the curtains, retreating to the safe interior of her house. Her mind was working rapidly. She needed to understand what was happening, but more than that, she needed help. Reluctantly, she took her cell phone and sent a message to the only person she trusted, Charlie Anderson, an old college friend who now worked as a private investigator in Oak Ridge. "Charlie, I need your help. I have a complicated situation. Can we meet today?" The response came almost immediately. "Of course. Sierra Cafe at 11 a.m.? Sarah confirmed the meeting and returned to the window. The car was still there, and the Guardian kept its eyes fixed on it, as if it could keep the threat away just with the intensity of its gaze. An idea began to form in her mind. If those men were observing her house, they would probably follow her when she left. She needed a distraction. She dressed quickly and prepared a small bag. Before leaving, she knelt beside the Guardian and, for the first time, spoke directly to it, carefully articulating the words. "I need you to stay. I'm going out through the back." The dog tilted its head as if it understood. Sarah hesitated, but then extended her hand and briefly stroked its head. The animal closed its eyes for a moment, accepting the gesture. Sarah discreetly left through the back of her house, using a small gate that led to a little-known alley. With one last look at the Guardian, which remained vigilant at its post, she disappeared into the winding streets of Oak Ridge. The Sierra Cafe was located in the historic center of town, a busy place where it would be difficult for someone to follow her without being noticed. Charlie was already there when she arrived, seated at a table away from the entrance with a view of the door. Tall, with graying hair despite being only 35, he had the kind of face that immediately inspired trust. Strong features, attentive, eyes and a sincere smile that opened when he saw her. "Sarah," he stood up to greet her, using the sign language he had learned during their college years. "It's been a while." She smiled weakly and sat down, mentally thanking the fact that the cafe was relatively empty at that hour. She quickly explained the situation. Richard's reappearance, the strange men, the threatening messages, and of course, the Guardian. That had appeared out of nowhere to protect her. Charlie listened attentively, his face becoming more serious with each new piece of information. When she finished, he remained silent for a few moments, processing everything. "Richard was always obsessive," he finally said, both in signs and verbally. "I remember how he reacted when you ended the relationship in college." Sarah nodded. That hadn't been the first time she had broken up with Richard. They had dated briefly in college, and the end of the relationship had resulted in weeks of stalking and threatening messages until Charlie had intervened. Years later, when they reconnected in Oak Ridge, Richard had seemed transformed, more mature, more stable. Sarah had lowered her guard and given him a second chance, only to discover that his apparent change was just a facade. "I think I never told you everything about our last breakup," confessed Sarah, her fingers moving nervously on the table. "Richard, he became controlling, possessive. He wanted to know where I was at all times, checked my phone, my social media. When I confronted him, he exploded. He destroyed several of my drawings and—" She stopped, her hands trembling slightly as she relived the memory. "And?" Charlie. Gently encouraged, he pushed me against the wall, said that I belonged to him, that no one else would have me. It was scary. I had never seen him like that before. Charlie let out a heavy sigh. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Sarah looked away. "Shame, maybe, or I didn't want to admit that I had made the same mistake twice. After we broke up, he sent me messages for weeks. That's why I changed my number." "And now he's back," Charlie stated, a wrinkle of concern forming between his eyebrows, "and apparently hired people to watch you. This is serious, Sarah. We need to file a police report. She shook her head, frustrated. Based on what? He appeared on my street, said he missed me. I have no proof that the men in the car are working for him. The threatening message, it was from a blocked number. He can deny it was him. Charlie frowned, recognizing the difficulty of the situation. Even so, we need to document what's happening. And in the meantime, I'll investigate Richard. See what he's been doing, who he's associated with. Sarah nodded, grateful to have someone by her side in this situation. As they discussed the next steps, a restlessness grew inside her. She had left the Guardian alone for too long. What if Richard appeared again? What if those men tried something? I need to go back, she signed abruptly. I'm worried about the dog. Charlie smiled, a gleam of affection in his eyes. Seems like he's really won you over. Sarah didn't respond, but she knew it was true. In just a few days, that silent stray had become a constant presence in her life, an unexpected source of comfort and security. As they left the cafe, Charlie insisted on accompanying her home. They walked side by side down the cobblestone streets, talking about simpler times when they were just two students discovering the world. Sarah felt lighter with her friend's presence, as if some of the weight she carried had been transferred to stronger shoulders. As they turned the corner of her street, however, all sensation of relief evaporated. The black car was no longer parked, but in its place was something much worse. Richard crouched on the sidewalk, apparently trying to approach the Guardian with something in his hand. The dog maintained a safe distance, the fur on. Its back bristled, its body in a defensive position. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the tension in the animal, the reluctance to move away from the house it had decided to protect, even in the face of a possible threat. "That's Richard?" asked Charlie, his voice assuming a grave tone that Sarah recognized by the slight trembling of his chest. She nodded, her eyes never leaving the scene ahead. "What is he doing?" Charlie narrowed his eyes. "It seems like he's trying to give something to the dog. Food, maybe." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Why would Richard be trying to attract the Guardian with food? Unless he wants to get rid of it, she whispered, the words escaping her lips as the realization hit her. He knows the Guardian protects me. Before Charlie could respond, Richard looked in their direction, and their gazes met. For a moment he seemed surprised, but soon a calculated smile formed on his face. He rose slowly, putting whatever he had been offering the dog in his jacket pocket. "Sarah," he called, completely ignoring Charlie. "Good to see you again. I was just trying to make friends with your new friend." The Guardian moved quickly, positioning itself between Richard and the direction where Sarah and Charlie were. Even at a distance, the message was clear. It would not allow Richard to approach her. Charlie took a step forward, partially placing himself in front of Sarah. "Richard Mendez. It's been a while." Richard finally looked at Charlie, his smile faltering for an instant. "Charlie Anderson, I didn't know you two still kept in touch." "Some friendships are for life," replied Charlie, his posture relaxed, but his eyes vigilant. A tense silence settled between them. Richard looked from Charlie to Sarah, and then to the Guardian, which remained in a defensive position. Finally he shrugged, a falsely casual gesture. "Well, I just stopped by to see how you were doing. Seems like you're well accompanied." He cast a meaningful look at Charlie. "See you around, Sarah." With that, he moved away in the opposite direction, walking with a studied calmness. Sarah released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding and ran to the Guardian, which visibly relaxed when she approached. "Are you okay?" she asked, crouching beside the animal and anxiously examining it. The Guardian responded by gently rubbing its head against her hand, a gesture of affirmation that warmed something inside Sarah's chest. Charlie approached slowly, observing the interaction between the two with a thoughtful look. "I have the feeling that Richard was offering something more than food to your friend here," he commented, his voice laden with suspicion. Sarah looked at the Guardian, at its intelligent eyes that seemed to understand much more than they should, and felt a shiver of fear. "You think he would try to—" "Let's not think the worst now," Charlie gently interrupted. but I think it would be prudent to keep the dog inside for a while." Sarah nodded, a decision forming in her mind. The guardian had protected her house, kept vigil, kept threats away. Now it was her turn to protect it. "Come," she signed to the animal, opening the door to her house. "It's safe inside." To her surprise, the guardian didn't hesitate. As if it had been waiting for this invitation since the first day, it calmly entered Sarah's house, turning only once to check if she was following. Charlie smiled as he witnessed the scene. "I think you two have already formed a stronger bond." "Than you realize." Sarah didn't respond, but as she watched the guardian carefully explore her living room, she knew Charlie was right. Somehow, in just a few days, that dog had found a way into her house and, without Sarah realizing it, also into her heart. As Charlie said goodbye, promising to investigate Richard and his possible accomplices, Sarah watched the guardian carefully exploring every corner of the living room, as if conducting a reconnaissance of the territory that was now also its duty to protect. "I'll keep you informed about any discoveries," Charlie signed before leaving. "And please, don't open the door to anyone you don't know. I don't like the way Richard looked at you." Sarah nodded, concern evident on her face. "Thank you for everything, Charlie. I don't know what I'd do without you." After her friend's departure, Sarah carefully locked the door and turned to her new companion. The guardian was watching her with that characteristic intensity, as if trying to decipher her thoughts. "Well, looks like it's just the two of us now," she signed, although she knew the dog didn't understand sign language. Still, there was something comforting about communicating with it, as if somehow it could understand the essence, if not the words. The following days established a new routine in the house on the cobblestone street. Sarah worked on her illustrations, while the guardian alternated between resting at her feet and patrolling the house, checking windows and doors like a dedicated sentinel. At night, she had improvised a bed for it in the hallway between her bedroom and the living room, a strategic point from where it could monitor both Sarah's bedroom and the entrances to the house. Charlie maintained daily contact, sharing the progress of his investigation. Richard owned a private security company in the neighboring town, which explained the men who were watching Sarah's house. Apparently, he had hired 2 of his employees to watch her, although the official reason was to ensure her safety. "He's building a narrative," Charlie explained in one of his messages. "He wants to appear concerned about you, as if these men were there to protect you, not to monitor you." The information made Sarah shudder. She remembered well how Richard was skilled at manipulating narratives, at making his controlling actions seem like gestures of love and concern. That's how he had kept her in the relationship for so long, making her doubt her own instincts, convincing her that his jealousy and possessiveness were just manifestations of how much he loved her. A week after the meeting with Charlie, Sarah received an unexpected message. It was from Julia Cooper, an old college classmate from design school who had also briefly dated Richard before her. "Sarah, I heard Richard is back in your life. We need to talk. It's important." Sarah's stomach tightened. She had never been close to Julia. In fact, after they had both dated Richard, a slight discomfort had settled between them, preventing them from developing a deeper friendship. Seeing her message now, years later, only increased her anxiety. After some hesitation, she responded, agreeing to meet Julia the next day at a cafe in the center of town. She informed Charlie about the meeting, and although he offered to accompany her, Sarah refused. She felt that this conversation needed to be private. That night she had difficulty sleeping. Her mind was buzzing with possibilities. What would Julia have to tell her? What information was so important that it made her seek contact after such a long time? Around 3 in the morning, she got up to drink water and found the guardian also awake, sitting in the hallway, vigilant eyes fixed on the front door. "You're restless too, aren't you?" she murmured, sitting beside it on the cool floor. The dog tilted its head in her direction, its brown eyes meeting hers in the dim light. There was something so human in that gaze, such deep understanding, that Sarah often found herself talking to it as if it were a person. "Tomorrow I'm meeting someone who might have answers," she continued, her fingers automatically finding the soft fur behind the animal's ears. but I'm afraid of what I'll discover." The Guardian gently rested its head on her knee, a gesture so simple and comforting that it brought tears to Sarah's eyes. How was it possible that an animal she had known for such a short time could make her feel so safe, so understood? The next morning, Sarah prepared for the meeting with a mixture of apprehension and determination. There was something in Julia's message that had left her alert, a veiled urgency that she couldn't ignore. Before leaving, she knelt before the Guardian. "I'll be back soon," she promised, wondering if she should feel foolish for talking to a dog as if it understood every word. But the attentive look she received in response had nothing foolish about it. It was the look of someone who perfectly understood the seriousness of the situation. The cafe chosen for the meeting was a half-hour walk from her house. It was a charming place, frequented mainly by tourists and local artists. Sarah arrived a few minutes before the scheduled time and chose a table at the back with a view of the entrance. Julia arrived punctually. She still had the same appearance from college, short dark hair, thick-framed glasses, relaxed style. But there was something different in her eyes, a caution, a shadow that Sarah didn't remember seeing before. "Thank you for coming," Julia began after they exchanged brief greetings. She spoke slowly, articulating the words well so that Sarah could easily read her lips. "I'm not sure where to start." "From the beginning, perhaps?" suggested Sarah, trying to ease the tension with a hesitant smile. Julia took a deep breath. "Richard contacted me a few weeks ago. He said you two had started talking again, that he was trying to win you back." She paused, studying Sarah's reaction. "I was worried. I know how persuasive he can be." Sarah felt a chill down her spine. "We didn't start talking again. He appeared out of nowhere on my street, after months without contact." Julia nodded as if confirming something she already suspected. "That's what I thought. Look, Sarah, I know we were never really friends, but I need to tell you something about Richard, something that happened after we broke up." What followed was a disturbing account. After they broke up, Richard had begun to stalk Julia, just as he had done with Sarah. But in her case, things had gone further. He had invaded her apartment, rummaged through her things, left disturbing gifts, small signs that he had been there while she was out. "I even filed a police report," continued Julia, her voice low, looking nervously around as if fearing that Richard might appear at any moment. "But without concrete evidence, the police couldn't do much. I ended up moving to Boston for a while, just to get away from him." Sarah felt her heart racing. Julia's story was like a distorted mirror of her own experience, but taken to even more disturbing extremes. "Why are you telling me this now?" she finally asked. "Because he's doing the same thing to you," replied Julia, leaning forward. "When he contacted me, he asked several questions about you, where exactly you lived, if you had security cameras, if you lived alone. I realized his intentions weren't good." A chill ran through Sarah's body. "The men in the car." "What?" "There are men watching me. Charlie discovered they work for Richard's security company." Julia's eyes widened. "He has a security company now. That's concerning, Sarah. It means he has resources, contacts." The two women were silent for a moment, absorbing the gravity of the situation. Finally, Julia spoke again, her voice almost a whisper. "There's something else you need to know. Richard has a fixation with control, with domination. When we were together, he used to say that I belonged to him, that no one else could have me. And when we broke up, he—" Julia hesitated, nervously running her fingers along the edge of her coffee cup. "He what?" pressed Sarah, although a part of her feared the answer. "He said that if he couldn't have me, no one else would." I thought, it was just an empty threat at the time, the outburst of someone who was hurt. But now, seeing how he's acting with you, I'm afraid it's more than that. Sarah felt the blood freeze in her veins. Julia's words echoed those that Richard had directed at her during their last fight. "You belong to me, Sarah. If you're not mine, you won't be anyone's." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of planning and exchange of information. Julia offered all the documentation she had about Richard's behavior, copies of the police report, saved messages, dates of incidents, material that could help Charlie in his investigation, and possibly give Sarah some legal protection. As they said goodbye, Julia held Sarah's hands firmly. "Be careful. Richard is unpredictable and obsessed with you in a way he never was with me." Sarah nodded, thanking Julia for the courage to share her experience. As she walked back home, she felt simultaneously more frightened and more prepared. The puzzle was beginning to form, the pieces fitting together to reveal a disturbing image of obsession and control. So absorbed was she in her thoughts that she almost didn't notice the black car that was following her at a discreet distance. It was only upon turning the corner of her street that she looked back and saw it, silently parking half a block away. The same car, the same men. They didn't even bother to be discreet anymore. She quickened her pace, anxious to reach the safety of her house to the comfort of the guardian's presence. As she approached the gate, however, she noticed that something was wrong. The front door, which she was sure she had locked before leaving, was ajar, and there was no sign of the guardian on the porch or in the garden where it would normally wait for her. Sarah's heart raced. With trembling fingers, she took out her cell phone and called Charlie. He didn't answer her visual calls, so she sent an urgent message. "Someone broke into my house. The guardian is gone. I need help." Panic seized Sarah as she stood paralyzed in front of her house. Her mind was racing with the worst possibilities. Someone had invaded her house, Richard, his goons, and the guardian had disappeared. What had they done to it? For an instant, she considered rushing in, calling for the dog. But prudence prevailed. If the intruders were still inside, it would be dangerous. She retreated a few steps, partially hiding behind a tree nearby, while frantically typing another message to Charlie. "I'm going to Mrs. Margaret's house. Meet me there." With her heart pounding in her chest, Sarah silently moved away and headed to her elderly neighbor's house, 2 doors down. Mrs. Margaret, a 70-year-old woman with always impeccably arranged white hair, opened the door with a worried expression when she saw Sarah's state. "My dear, what happened? You're pale." Sarah entered quickly and with trembling hands explained the situation. Mrs. Margaret, who had lived alone since her husband's passing years ago, had a special fondness for Sarah, who often helped her with small household chores and kept her company on her lonelier days. "Stay here while you wait for your friend," the lady insisted, leading her to the cozy living room. "I'll prepare some tea to calm your nerves." While Mrs. Margaret busied herself in the kitchen, Sarah anxiously looked out the window, waiting for Charlie and at the same time keeping an eye on her own house. The black car was still there, parked halfway down the street, its occupants apparently unaware of her new whereabouts. Charlie arrived 15 minutes later, his face tense with concern. After a brief explanation to Mrs. Margaret, who insisted on staying with them, in case they needed a witness, he and Sarah discussed the next steps. "I'll check your house," said Charlie, his expression serious. "And I've already called the police. They're on their way." "And the guardian?" asked Sarah, her eyes tearing up. "What if they hurt it, Charlie?" He gently squeezed her shoulder. "We'll find it, I promise." While they waited for the police to arrive, Charlie's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from a contact he had put to watch Richard. "He's in the office of his security company now, just arrived." Sarah felt a wave of anger momentarily replace the fear. If Richard had done something to the guardian, she pushed the thought away, unable to complete it. When the police car finally parked in front of Mrs. Margaret's house, Sarah noticed that the black car had disappeared. Charlie quickly spoke with the officers, showing his private investigator identification and explaining the situation. 2 officers, a middle-aged man named Sergeant Oliver and a young female officer named Lieutenant Sanders, listened attentively. "We'll check the residence, ma'am," said Sergeant Oliver, addressing Sarah. "Please wait here." Sarah nodded nervously, wringing her hands as the officers and Charlie headed to her house. The minutes dragged like hours. Mrs. Margaret held her hand, offering silent comfort as they both watched from the window. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Charlie returned. His expression was serious, but not tragic, which gave Sarah a small relief. "The house has been searched," he began. "There was clearly a break-in, some drawers were opened, papers rummaged through, but it doesn't seem like they took anything valuable." "And the Guardian?" asked Sarah, her voice almost inaudible. Charlie hesitated. "There's no sign of it in the house or in the yard. But we also didn't find anything that would indicate it was hurt." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to control the wave of despair that threatened to engulf her. In just a few days, that dog had become a vital part of her life. The idea that something might have happened to it was unbearable. "The officers are checking the surroundings," continued Charlie, "and they've asked that you go there to check if anything is missing from the house." Reluctantly, but knowing it was necessary, Sarah accompanied Charlie back to her residence. The officers had established a perimeter, and Sergeant Oliver was taking notes while Lieutenant Sanders took photographs of the forced lock and other evidence of break-in. Upon entering, Sarah felt a chill. The sensation of violation was palpable. Someone had invaded her sanctuary, rummaged through her things, disturbed the order she so carefully maintained. Her office had been the most affected, drawings scattered, files opened. The computer turned on, though she was sure she had turned it off before leaving. "It seems they were looking for something specific," commented Charlie, observing the pattern. "Of the mess." Sarah nodded, thoughtful. What could Richard be looking for? She didn't possess anything of exceptional value, no secret worth such an invasion. Unless— "My drawings," she murmured, quickly heading to a specific folder on her desk. "The designs I'm creating for that publisher in New York." Charlie approached, frowning. "You think they might have stolen your work?" "I don't know, but—" Sarah stopped abruptly, her eyes fixed on the back window. There was a movement outside. In the small garden she rarely used, something was moving among the bushes. Without thinking twice, she ran to the back door, ignoring the concerned calls of Charlie and the officers. She threw it open forcefully and went out into the garden, her eyes frantically scanning the semi-abandoned vegetation. And then, like an apparition, it appeared. The Guardian, dirty and with a few scratches but alive and whole, emerged from the bushes. Upon seeing her, the animal ran toward her, its entire posture indicating relief and joy. Sarah fell to her knees, arms open to receive her protector. The Guardian buried its muzzle in her neck, its body trembling slightly against hers. It was alive. It was okay. "Where were you?" she whispered, tears freely streaming down her face as she examined the animal for injuries. Apart from a few scratches and dirt, it seemed unharmed. Charlie and the officers had come out to the garden, observing the scene with expressions ranging from surprise to relief. "Seems like your friend managed to escape during the invasion," commented Sergeant Oliver. "Smart of him to hide here in the garden." But there was something in the Guardian's behavior that didn't seem to align with this theory. It wasn't just happy to see her. It seemed agitated, restless. It kept looking at her and then at a specific point at the back of the garden, as if it wanted her to follow. "I think he wants to show us something," said Sarah, slowly rising. Following. The Guardian, which was now determinedly trotting to the back of the property, the group arrived at a particularly dense area of vegetation. The dog began to dig frantically at a specific spot, occasionally looking at Sarah as if asking for help. Charlie knelt beside the animal and helped to clear away the earth. Soon something began to emerge, a piece of dark fabric. Carefully pulling it, Charlie revealed what appeared to be a jacket, the same one Richard had been wearing when he tried to approach the Guardian days ago. "This is—" began Sergeant Oliver, leaning down to examine the find. "Richard Mendez's jacket," completed Sarah, her heart racing. "The man who has been stalking me." Lieutenant Sanders approached, already wearing latex gloves. "There's something in the pockets," she said, carefully feeling the fabric. With precise movements, she removed several items: a paper with Sarah's address written on it, a copy of her house key, and a small, unlabeled bottle containing what appeared to be ground meat mixed with some kind of whitish powder. "This looks like poison," said the officer, cautiously smelling the bottle. "We'll send it for analysis, but—" Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. Richard had tried to poison the Guardian, and the dog somehow had not only escaped the trap, but had also stolen the evidence and buried it in the garden, as if it knew exactly what it was doing. "This changes everything," declared Sergeant Oliver, his posture now more assertive. "We have concrete evidence for a warrant against Mr. Mendez. Home invasion, attempted animal poisoning, stalking." While the officers made notes and took photographs of the evidence, Sarah crouched again beside the Guardian, hugging it tightly. "You're amazing," she whispered in its ear, though she knew the animal couldn't hear her words. "You saved yourself and me too." Charlie watched the scene with a thoughtful smile. "You know, Sarah, I've seen many intelligent dogs in my work, but this one is really special." Sarah nodded, a feeling of admiration mixed with gratitude filling her chest. The Guardian returned her gaze with that familiar intensity, that connection that transcended words or sounds. The following hours were a whirlwind of activities. Statements were collected, reports filled out. A warrant was issued for Richard. Mendez's arrest on multiple charges, including stalking, home invasion, and animal cruelty. The jacket and its contents were sent for analysis, and the fingerprints found in Sarah's house matched those of Richard and one of his employees, the same man she had seen in the black car. When the officers finally departed, promising to maintain surveillance in the area until Richard was located and detained, it was already late at night. Charlie insisted on staying, sleeping on the living room couch to ensure Sarah's safety. The Guardian, in turn, assumed its usual post in the hallway between the bedroom and the living room, more alert than ever. Lying in her bed, Sarah relived the day's events, trying to process everything that had happened. Julia's revelation about Richard's obsessive behavior, the invasion of her house, the disappearance and miraculous reappearance of the Guardian, with the evidence that could finally end the nightmare. Her cell phone vibrated softly under her pillow. It was a message from Charlie. "Just received news. Richard was detained trying to leave town. It's all over now. Rest." Tears of relief sprang to Sarah's eyes. It was finally over. The threat that had been hanging over her life had been neutralized. Thanks largely to the Guardian, a stray dog that had appeared out of nowhere and had become her most dedicated protector. As if sensing her emotion, the Guardian silently entered the room and approached the bed. Sarah extended her hand, inviting it, and to her surprise, the animal softly jumped onto the bed, settling beside her. It had never done this before. It had always maintained its post in the hallway, as if respecting the invisible boundaries she had established. "I think you deserve a promotion," she joked, stroking its soft fur. The Guardian rested its head on her arm, its intelligent eyes fixed on her with that intensity that had always fascinated her. There was so much in those eyes: loyalty, intelligence, and something else, something almost human that she couldn't name. The next morning, Sarah woke feeling more rested than she had in weeks. The Guardian was still by her side, vigilant, even in sleep. Charlie was already awake, preparing coffee in the kitchen. "Good morning," he signed when Sarah appeared. "How do you feel?" "Lighter," she replied, smiling, as if a weight had been removed. The following days brought a succession of good news. The analysis of the vial found in Richard's jacket confirmed the presence of a potent rat poison, mixed with meat, a trap clearly intended for the Guardian. Richard remained in custody, denying the accusations, but the evidence against him was substantial, especially after Julia had agreed to testify about his pattern of obsessive behavior. Week after the invasion, Sarah made a decision. She called the Guardian to the garden and knelt in front of it, gently holding its muzzle so she could see its eyes as she spoke. "You appeared in my life when I needed it most, even though I didn't know it," she said, both vocally and in sign. "Language. You protected me, warned me about dangers I didn't even suspect. It seems unfair to continue calling you Guardian, as if it were just your function, not who you are." The dog tilted its head slightly, its eyes fixed on her with that familiar intensity. "I've been thinking of a name for you. A real name." She paused, her hands moving to form the corresponding sign. "How about hero? Because that's what you are. My silent hero." As if perfectly understanding the meaning of that moment, the now-named hero gently placed its paw on Sarah's hand, its eyes never leaving hers. In that instant, something solidified between them, a bond that transcended words or sounds. a connection built on mutual protection, trust, and an understanding that went beyond what either of them could explain. In her world of silence, Sarah had found the most unlikely of voices, not one that spoke with words, but one that communicated, through loyalty, courage, and unconditional devotion. And in that stray dog, which had appeared out of nowhere to become her guardian, she had found not just a protector, but a companion, a friend, a family. As she watched Hero run through the garden, now clean and organized after days of working together, Sarah smiled. Her world, once so ordered and predictable, had been completely transformed by the arrival of this extraordinary being. And for the first time in a long time, she was genuinely happy with the unpredictability of life, with the surprises that destiny could bring. Because sometimes the strongest bonds are those we cannot see or hear, the invisible ties that connect souls that recognize each other, that protect each other, that complete each other. And in the shared silence between a deaf woman and her faithful canine companion, there was a language deeper than any word could express, the universal language of love, loyalty, and trust. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Sarah and her faithful companion Hero has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here, clicking on the left. If you enjoyed this narrative, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories,